a database thick? It's really the trifecta. This is the holy trinity of databases. You heard it here first from me, somebody who's really into databases. You have querying, ingestion, and management. So, you need to get your data in somehow, you need to query it, and you need to manage it. And in any talk that's worth its salt, like the previous talk, you heard each of those systems being mentioned as something that people were interested in. So I'm going to cover these in 3 sections. First, querying. Querying in Druid, when the project first launched, looked like this. This is the native query. This is a native top-hand query. You write it. It's a JSON object. You send it via HTTP. There's nothing magical. If you can use curl, you can write this query. From any programming language, you can issue HTTP calls. You can run this. It will return a JSON array back, and it's pretty simple conceptually to use, but the query itself is very complex to write. It's very not obvious what this query does, and it can be very intimidating. In fact, this query is kind of like machine code, because it directly tells Druid what to use. It tells it exactly which query engine to use and which data source to scan, and even how to limit the segments by interval. So the first thing we did when we started thinking about making Druid easier to use and more user-friendly is we actually used Apache Calcite to make a SQL layer around it. And this is a huge usability increase, no doubt. I mean, there's certain companies that I'm sure wouldn't have even given Druid a second look if it didn't have SQL. And SQL is legitimately very useful for when you're just trying to prototype something. And for a while, we launched Druid SQL quite a while back ago. It was always in the experimental phase as we're ironing out the issues, for example, like the filter expansion. And then in 2015, we finally declared it production ready because we just have enough people actually using it in production, playing with it, and we had bugs, we ran out all the things and we fixed everything, and this is good to go. It also kind of slowly over time increased in its capability, and now we've kind of presenting it as something that can be used as the first order language. And querying is also, when you have a query, you might want to actually run it. So you could post this query through curl or what have you, but you can also go into the console and use the nice query view that's now given to you to submit this query. And the nice thing about the view in the console, it's really there to make it easy to learn how to query Druid, how to do it effectively, and debug something if you're having an issue. This isn't meant to be your query UI, this is just the console that comes with Druid, but it is completely integrated with the Druid SQL language. It actually compiles the docs into itself, so it can do autocomplete. So if you're just thinking, oh, what does that function do? You just start typing it, and the documentation will appear right there and then. We also added the ability to quickly do an explain query, and actually for a given query, see the underlying JSON query that you want to execute. So if you're thinking, this SQL query, is it still doing that weird thing where it expands filters to in a really crazy way? You can verify that it does not do that anymore. That was fixed. But also this is very useful because it's very interesting to understand how SQL plans its queries, and it can be very educational. So teach yourself Druid native queries without ever looking at the documentation by just mashing the explain key. And for some reason this slide doesn't load, so okay, and lastly, we added a functionality to this query view where you can actually modify the SQL queries directly from the UI by interacting with it. And this is very cool. It's actually too cool to describe it in a screenshot, so I'll do a demo later on. All right, avoiding that slides bug now. Management. So how do you manage data in Druid? Well, first of all, when you're thinking of management and you're thinking of Druid, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to deploy the services all across your machines. At first, when Druid first shipped, these are the services that kind of came with it. You had 6 things, you had to deploy it. It was a little messy. It was like, okay, what kind of hardware do I need for which service? We've greatly simplified this by actually grouping these into just 3 logical things that you need to deploy. And this is apparent in the deployment scripts that you'll see in a second. So you just have your data servers that actually are the workhorses. They are like actually serving the data and ingesting it and making segments and serving them. You have your query servers that are doing the scatter gather of taking a query, converting it into things that the data nodes can process, and then reassembling and giving you the results. And lastly, you have the coordination and the master server that just oversees that everything, this management right there. And this is exemplified when I say, well, what does it mean? What do you mean you drew boxes around it? Well, when you download Druid and you ls the bin directory, you'll see that you have a bunch of very convenient scripts that are just there to start the server of your choice, like the data server or the master server or the query server. And that will start all the processes and configure everything just as you want. So it's just one single command that you run instead of having to figure out how to start that. It makes deployment a lot easier, and I think it makes the quick start a lot nicer. And in particular, we created a nice little config for if you're just running on a single server, then you have these nice configs that you can run depending on your server size. And there's even one that's a micro quick start if you're running on your laptop or on a very, very, very low power computer, just maybe kicking the tires around. This is going to be a really nice config that's very optimized for that. That's going to start everything for you in the right way and let you play with it. And when you start it, this is what it looks like. It just internally, this is just a Python script. You can see what it does. It's going to just start the right services, and it's going to make sure that each one is logging to a good file. It's going to do all of the headachy stuff you would naturally need to do for you. So running through Druid Quick Start is now one single command. Then there's management in terms of like figuring out what's going on in my cluster right now. And any Druid old-timer, and by old-timer I mean anybody who's used Druid more than half a year ago, would probably see or recognize these things. By a show of hands, who recognizes these screenshots at the top? Cool, I'm sorry for your pain. So these are the old consoles in Druid. They were written by back-end engineers. And as a bona fide front-end engineer, I can tell you that back-end engineers cannot write front-end code. Back-end engineers, they make jokes about JavaScript, but I want to see them write JavaScript. The other thing that you had is these miscellaneous APIs that, because these consoles, they didn't really go all the way to serving everything you needed, you also had to kind of know these APIs. So legitimately, if you were starting to look at Druid, maybe let's say a year ago, you would need to look at this thing, you need to look at this thing, you need to look at the APIs, and you also need to have the wisdom to know the difference. But now, it's much simpler. It's just one single console that does everything for you. Everything is divided into tabs and is very consistent. Another nice thing is that the whole thing is powered by system tables that are themselves running on top of Druid SQL. So like any SQL database, Druid is now able to give you metadata about itself in SQL. So if you want to understand, okay, what segments do I have in my cluster? What tasks am I running? All of these things, you can actually, for any view in this console, you can click on this button right here, and you're taken to the actual SQL query that this thing generates. Which means if you're thinking, oh, like, I see this view, but I want to maybe add another column to it, or I want to understand how, I could maybe have a monitoring service that triggers if this value is above that amount. Very simple. click one button, you get the SQL query for it, mess about with it in the built-in query view, and you have yourself, you just saved yourself like all the work. You don't have to open the documentation at all. So that was management, and management is very important to get it right, and I'll showcase that all in a demo in a second. But I want to talk about ingestion, because I think ingestion was always kind of the thorniest thing to get right in Druid, and it's also the thing that, you know, if you don't get your data ingested into a database, you really can't play around and validate for yourself that it's really, really fast. I mean, if you have your data in a database, you might be like, oh, I have to write a JSON query to query it, like it's weird. But then you run that one first query, and it's magical by how fast it is, and you're hooked. It only takes one shot, and then you're hooked. But if you don't get your data ingested in the first place, then how will you ever know how good it is? Ingestion was always a bit of a pain, because you have to write these, the theme of Druid is JSON. You have to write these big JSON blobs that describe where your data is, how you want to ingest it, what kind of things you want to use, like methods, what kind of schema you will build, and all of that. And you spend a while writing this. You kind of write this big JSON. You probably use the documentation a lot, and you maybe have two tab and then a text editor. You switch between them, and you write, and then you submit it, and you cross your fingers, and you get an error, and you go look at the logs, and you're like, oh my god. And that was the typical way of ingesting data into Druid. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
It is, because you've already done that when you file your taxes, if you were to do it directly using the 1040 form. And that's why people don't file their taxes like this. We put our heads together, and this was earlier this year. We were thinking about how to solve this problem. It was in April. We were thinking about taxes, hence the data loader. That is a almost direct ripoff, as far as a conceptual ripoff of a completely different product can be, of TurboTax. Just like TurboTax, it takes you through ingesting your data one step at a time. The end result is that you still build that ingestion spec, just like in TurboTax. At the end of the day, you just fill in the 1040 form, and at the end of the day, you just fill in the form and you e-file it. Same exact thing. Step by step, you add the columns and the rows and whatever, and then you get the ingestion spec that's all written for you completely mechanically. You can edit it however you want if you choose to edit it in the raw, but you're probably just going to click submit. And the cool thing is that it actually, at every step of the way, it runs it against Druid at every single click that you make. So if you make a mistake, you will spot it as soon as you make it, not when you later have to submit the spec. Which is just like in TurboTax, when it gives you a meter for how much refund you are getting so far. And then you're like, oh my god, $1,600,000 of refund, I'm doing great. And then you think, whoa, maybe I'm not doing that great. Maybe I should have filed earlier and gotten that refund because I could earn interest on it. Am I actually not good with money? Never mind, let's do some data ingestion into Druid. So this is how it looks. It's a step-by-step process, and it's pretty cool. And actually, we recently released Druid 016, where this thing received a major facelift, and I kind of show a timeline of that. But one of the biggest things that was recently released is the ability to connect to a streaming data source with just a few clicks. So to something like a Kafka or a Kinesis. And this is, it's hard to kind of show this with pictures. I'd much rather just give a live demo. So let's see.
Dude, that's cool.
All right, so right here I have a Druid cluster. It's running. It's a real Druid cluster that is for real running. And it's serving lots of things. And actually, those tiers we're talking about, we have them. The tasks, they're running. Segments, yep, it's got segments. But let's add more segments to it. Let's load some data. So this is, if you want to play around with this, I highly recommend you try. There's even some example data sets for you to try. There's a cool quick start. But I'm going to just select Apache Kafka here, and I'm going to connect to topic. So all I have to provide is the things that are highlighted in blue. It will guide me through each step of the way, and if I'm wondering, what are Bootstrap servers? Well, if I'm wondering that, I probably shouldn't be using a Kafka ingestion. So I'm going to bootstrap it with this server right here. And I have a topic called GitHub that's ingesting the publicly available data set of GitHub, which is a very prominent social network for sharing code. So this is GitHub, and I'm going to preview this data set. And it's actually going to go out, sample a few raw data events from this topic, and show them to me. And I can, this is there just to be like, yeah, everything so far is good. We've identified the topic correctly. And to me, visually, it looks like JSON. So I'm gonna actually click parse data, and this will pick up the fact that it's JSON, and it will actually parse it. It will select the parser for me. And as I'm going along through this, I'm actually, under the hood, editing this spec through these steps one at a time. And it's showing me, so far, what is Druid thinking that this data is. So far we know Kafka, we know GitHub, we know the Bootstrap servers. I connected to the right server, that's great. That does look like GitHub data. And this is how it will parse into columns. That looks legit. And I can see what the underlying row was. Okay, that's good. Next, very importantly, Druid shards everything by time. So it's very important to get the parsing of whatever column you have as time correctly. And this step is dedicated to that. It really gives it the importance that it needs, that you might miss if you just went through the documentation. And here I see that it's parsed time for me correctly. You can really play around and see how you can parse really anything as time. It's really fun. I'm not going to do it for this demo, but please download it and play with it yourself. Little known fact, Druid can actually do transformations and filtering as part of the ETL, just like these are very simple transformations on a row-by-row basis, but they can be very useful. It's a little known fact because maybe by the time you actually finish writing the JSON spec, you're already too tired to read any more documentation. But it isn't little if you have it just nicely exposed to you. So I could click on something and I could maybe have an H plus 1 here, and I could add this transformation. And it will actually go to Druid and it will show me what it thinks it will do. And this is very useful because now I know that, I guess, Druid will interpret nulls as 0, and actually, that now I know how Druid will interpret that addition. It's actually going out to Druid to do that, and that's very useful. And similarly, I could just drop it right here. And again, it will do a preview for me. So I could also filter my data out as I ingest it. This is something that Druid could always do, but it's very helpful to have a step for it. And then I reach the very important schema step, where I can actually understand what the schema of Druid will be. This step is exactly showing me what will be in my data source. And one of the most powerful features of Druid is this ability to do rollup. This ability to take a bunch of columns that are, maybe you drop some data that you don't need, maybe you put it instead of, maybe I don't care specifically about the user, I only care about the repo. And it actually gives me almost a preview here of what my rollup will be. In fact, I'm seeing that this event will be rolled up. I can play around with my query granularity here. I can drop a column and see that my rollup will likely rise. If I keep dropping stuff, I guess, I don't know. Let's drop this one as well. Oh my God, look at how much rollup I'm getting. Rollup is something I'm not gonna cover here, but it's very helpful to have a preview of it. But I'm gonna turn it off. I'm gonna turn off rollup completely and just have this data ingested as just flat, like one row from the data equals one row in this data set for simplicity. Lastly, I'm going to do all the partitioning tuning and publishing configurations that I need. So I'm going to say I'm going to have hour-long segments. I'm going to use the earliest offset here. So I'm going to take the data from the very start of my topic, and I'm not going to tweak any of the other things as part of this demo because this is a very simple demo. But if I wanted to understand what does task count mean, what does completion timeout, all of the documentation is actually being compiled into the console right here and available through these info boxes. So it's very helpful if you're trying to understand what it is without having to cross-link between documentation. Just have it right there in line for you in the UI. And then let's give this name. I'll do GitHub pin. And then I'm going to say next. This is the final step where it's like, all right, we've generated this spec as part of this, this process, and I'm going to just submit it. And as soon as I submit it, it will go into to the right view, to the supervisor's view. There I see that it's pending. I could look at its details when they become available. I can actually see the history of the supervisor right here, so I don't have much history on this one. And it's going to pen for just a few seconds, and then it's going to actually start ingesting the data. And this whole process was something that used to take hours in Druid, and hours not of meaningful work that makes you feel like you grew as a human being. It's hours of cursing and saying bad things at the computer, and then feeling bad about yourself. I mean, like, if you can say these kind of things, what does that make you? Are you a monster? This GitHub pin is now running. The supervisor is running. Let's see if I have any tasks for it. So let's refresh this here. And oh, cool, I have a task. It's running. I have a running task. It's ingesting data right now. I can look at its logs, and it will actually tail the logs for me here. Stuff is happening, discovering partitions. Fascinating. And then I can look at my data sources, and somewhere in here, oh, there it is, already 78 segments. Wow, Druid is really chugging along while I talk. And lastly, I can very easily go from here. So far, just recall, this is all shipping with Druid. I haven't ever left any kind of system. I haven't done anything outside of just what comes with the project. I can go here. I can have a nice select star on my GitHub pin, run that, get some data back. So I already indexed and fully. I can start iterating on this. What's cool is that we went from a world where you had to write these JSON blobs and you really had to know what you're doing, to a world where you write SQL, which is much easier because you probably already know SQL if you're messing about with data. And it's definitely much more familiar, and if you don't know SQL, it feels like it's like your fault, not Druid's fault. But what if you don't know SQL, but you still want to feel really cool? Well, the cool thing is that, just as a nice aside, there's actually a thing built into here that will generate the SQL queries for you to show you what kind of queries work best in Druid. And in fact, you can actually click on, for example, count, and you can reorder this column. Wow. It will actually rewrite the query for you. So for example, I can go on age, aggregate, and I can sum by age, and I'll add an aggregate. It will rewrite the query for me. I'll go to repo, and I'll group by repo to add another group by column. And now it's gonna chug, 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 and it's gonna get it. And I'm gonna order it by language, and it's going to do it. And this is all happening in real time. It's executing these queries. You can download your data from here. And it's a very nice place to experiment. Whatever query you wrote down, you can click here, and you can say, okay, explain this query for me. And you'll understand what Druid is doing under the hood. Now, because top end only supports one column, I added 2 group by things. Now I'm using 2 grouping columns. Now I'm using a group by query. This is very helpful to know, and very helpful if you're running a query to understand why it's running not as fast. as you might expect it to be, or maybe even why it's running faster than you think it should run. And lastly, I can click here and actually copy the query ID to take it to my other tools and go with that from there. So that is a nice kind of demo. I highly advise you to play with this yourself. One of my favorite features here actually is the fact that you can load data from your clipboard. Yeah. So somebody just sends you like, hey, I have some data that looks like this in Slack. Just like, here's like 3 rows, paste it in here, load it, easy. So what's the kind of the timeline for this? So just looking at the past, Druid has really advanced in the past. Druid releases are quarterly, so this is really looking at the last, other than Druid SQL introduced sometime in the past, but not actually like introduced as an experimental feature. Since then, the past 4 releases, we just did Druid 016, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and this is the FOMO slide. This is the slide if you're using Druid and you're using an older version, man, you really should update. And if you are not using Druid, now is a great time to jump in and give it a kick around. So as you can see, in the world before Druid 014, there was no new console. And it's only in Druid 013 that you could actually query all of the system tables via SQL, so you can like forget about all the APIs. And well, if you're in the world before 013, you have to remember the APIs. In 015, we made SQL no longer experimental. We added the point-and-click data loader for batch data that I didn't show, but that you see in the quick start. We added the query auto-completion. And then in 016 that came out just now, we completely revamped the docs to make them a lot more friendlier. I really appreciate you complimenting the docs, but I think they're even better now. We added the streaming data loader, which is what I just demoed. There's a cool tool now where you can re-ingest data from Druid into Druid. Specifically, it's this thing. So you can re-index data in Druid. It's like create table from select. And it guides you through a point-and-click way, and you can show you how you could dump some columns and maybe get better optimization as a result, or maybe you want to filter out some data for privacy reasons. And then we also added the interactive query view, and most importantly, clipboard-based ingestion. Like, people debate about whether you should be doing batch or streaming Kafka. I'm like, just Slack your data to me. Just Slack it to me. If it doesn't fit in Slack, I don't really care for it. So the future of this is really cool. One of the things that I should mention here, but I don't because I really just focused on usability, but one of the things we added was continuously improving the performance and quality of the native batch ingestion. And our goal there is that what we added so far was the ability to parallelize it, so it's not just one thread and one middle manager now. In fact, there's a little, if I just pick some example data, and I'm just gonna skip this. There's a cool little toggle for do I want parallel or not parallel. Actually, some UI will be different because they don't support the same options, but this will guide you through it. So one of the things we were trying to do is we were trying to make it so that when you spin up Druid, you don't have to use Hadoop. You don't have to use Spark or anything. Druid is the data system that will ingest all of your data, and be it batch or streaming. The streaming thing is really nailed down already, but with batch, we're going to make it, we're going to give it the ability to, there's certain simplifications we need to make for parallel loading. We're going to give it the ability to read binary files like Parquet and Orc, and load data directly from HDFS. And then when that all comes together, we hope to have a goodbye party for Hadoop. And also, one really cool feature that's going to make its way into this console is actually an automatic doctor that will scan your Druid cluster using our guaranteed open source know-how, and will tell you all sorts of cool ways you can improve your performance by just applying certain heuristics that we can do programmatically. And so this is all product improvements. This is everything I've been talking about is stuff is committed, is pull requests. But you know what else? We have a really cool community. So if you have, if you're interested in Druid, or if you just like screenshots of the console and memes, join our Slack channel where there's always really cool, vibrant activity. There's people talking on it right now. Oh my God, so many messages. You might want to mute it so verbose. And I wish Slack had better support for threading. Also join our mailing list that's all threaded if you prefer to communicate over email. And also join us on GitHub, that social network I was ingesting data from. And if you like it, star us. If you have any kind of issues, open issues, and hopefully contribute your code back to the community. So thank you so much. This is how we've been making Druid easier to use. Questions?
Hey,
Yeah.
what's the Slack channel?
The Slack channel is, it's actually the Apache Slack channel, the ASF channel. So if you go to Druid community, and in here you have a cool, you have to use the invite, you have to be cool enough to participate. So the invite is here, you join the ASF channel, it's for all the ASF projects. And don't post in the welcome room, be like, hey, how to make Druid quick. Comment to #Druid, and yeah, that's where the magic happens. There's always tons of discussions, and I pretty much just hang out on the Slack channel because I love it. And yeah, you can, I don't know how much you guys know about Slack. It's like the best, and you, I secretly wish Slack. I don't know. I love it. If you use Slack at work, just add a Slack workspace. It's so easy, and then just come in for the whenever you're feeling down, come in for the cool Druid memes. Cool. Best question. Thank you for that. All right. Yeah.
So you mentioned the Druid Doctor as a feature thing. Are you going to add any of expose any of the metrics and stuff that Druid produces in that console at some point?
Yeah, that's something that we're looking into. Druid produces a lot of metrics. They're best stored in Druid itself. The Druid Doctor is a different kind of idea from that. It's really utilizing the system tables to it's a very simple idea that it's there's literally a set of SQL queries that if you ran them, they would probably tell you if there's anything wrong with your cluster. It's segments that meet a certain quality, tasks that meet a certain quality, and stuff like that. And I was looking at that list that I have in front of me, and I was like, this should be a blog post. And I was like, no, this should be a doctor. So that's what it's going to be. Probably with a blog post as well. Doesn't matter. Cool. Well, yeah, everybody try it out. Druid 016 just came out. Best time to give it a whirl. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Pinterest, for being part of the community.
Yeah.